In parallel to operations in Gaza City, which has seen the departure of over 700,000 residents, the IDF also continues to act to destroy terror targets in Rafah. And meanwhile, the President of the United States delivered remarks at the United Nations General Assembly in New York this week, harshly criticizing the conduct of the United Nations, as Israel is featured in the remarks of one head of state addressing the assembly after the other. For their part, Hamas also responded to events at the United Nations General Assembly, especially the recognition of a Palestinian state by so many Western countries. A senior Hamas official plainly and unapologetically said recognition of Palestine is a success of the October 7 attacks. Speaking of Hamas, 2 days after they released a video of hostage Alon Ahel, the family circulated a photo from it and appealed to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just before his departure to the United Nations, amidst questions about whether President Trump might soon declare a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, circling back to the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York, Syrian interim President Abu Muhammad al-Julani admitted his greatest fear before the hundreds of assembled diplomats, and it wasn't what anybody expected to hear. And on Wednesday evening, a UAV, a drone, fired by the terrorist organization the Houthis in Yemen, exploded in Israel's city in Eilat, leaving 23 people wounded, including 2 who were listed in serious condition, as Iran stands firmly behind the Houthis' so-called recycled terror project. And speaking of Iran, the president of that country also addressed the United Nations General Assembly meeting and repeated the same old lies about not pursuing nuclear weapons, only wanting peaceful relations with its neighbors, and so on. We will tell you more about that, because many analysts believe that another round of hostilities with Iran is just around the corner. And finally, the CEO of Israel's aerospace industries reveals the real interests of Macron in the move against Israel. Spoiler alert, it's all about the money. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, and together with me is Mati Shoshani, helping me bring you all the truth about what's happening in Israel. After several Western governments declared the recognition of a Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York this week, it's important for me to say that the party responsible for the suffering of the Gazan population is the Hamas terrorist organization, and it is the one that started all of this war, and it is the source of the evil that is being spread in Gaza. They continue to act in ways that are against the interests of the Palestinian people and the governments that recognize the Palestinian state just this week, and they know it. This week, Hamas once again showed its true face to the world, where some of its gunmen fired at IDF troops from inside the Shifa hospital inside Gaza City. At the same time, reports have emerged of intense airstrikes in Gaza City, and a soldier from Givati Reconnaissance Brigade was severely wounded in battle in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, while the IDF confirmed that the deputy commander of Hamas's naval police was terminated. On Wednesday, a UAV launched by the Houthis in Yemen flew at low altitude, evading Israeli air defenses, and hit the mall by the sea in Israel's Red Sea resort city of Eilat. At least 21 people, mostly Israeli tourists, were wounded in this strike, including 2 who were listed in serious condition at the hospital. The IDF is investigating why the drone was not intercepted, as most of them are. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us all the information on what happened and was said about Israel at the United Nations, and it turns out that there weren't a single country that didn't talk about us. It's nice to be popular, right? But in any case, Prime Minister Netanyahu departed for the United States on Wednesday evening, attributing great importance to his UN speech, in which he will respond to the states that recognize Palestine and will try to explain the decision to capture Gaza City and the strike in Doha earlier this month. But the key event of this trip will be his meeting in the White House with President Trump. Speaking of President Trump, during his own addresses to the United Nations General Assembly meeting, he harshly criticized the recognition of a Palestinian state and called it a reward for Hamas for the atrocities that it committed, and called for the release of all the hostages. And meanwhile, United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is trying to persuade senior officials in Doha to return and play an active role in the negotiations, while the Qatari channel is paralyzed since the Israeli strike in that country. However, President Trump met this week with leaders from the Arab states and discussed the hostage issue with them. Those meetings resulted in a statement from these leaders saying, amongst other things, we call for a rapid end to this war and the release of the hostages. But there are questions looming over President Trump's plans for the future of the Gaza Strip, including the possibility that he will simply hand off all the problems there to Turkey and Saudi Arabia. We'll take a closer look. In related news, senior Hamas official Usma Hamdan was interviewed this week by the Hezbollah-affiliated Lebanese media portal El Mayadin. In the interview, he said that Hamas is not passing messages since the assassination attempt in Qatar. The recognitions of Palestine are a small step, but we expect the end of this war. He also denied that Hamas had tried to pass messages directly to President Trump, and for good measure. He also demanded that sanctions be imposed on Israel. Another man making demands this week was Syria's interim president Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who used his address to the United Nations General Assembly, which is, by the way, the first by a Syrian head of state in almost 60 years, to demand that Israel retreat from its positions on Mount Hermon and the buffer zone in southern Syria and allow United Nations peacekeepers to deploy there instead. He also emphasized that Syria will not pose a threat and wants to keep its distance. In the meantime, Israel is preparing for the arrival of several boats off the coast of Gaza next week, as the Flotilla has managed to continue sailing despite several setbacks and internal arguments. The flotilla's leadership has rejected an Israeli offer to allow the ships to dock in Ashkelon port and have their cargo sent into Gaza, making it obvious that the delivery of humanitarian aid is just an excuse for them to make a big scene so that they can post videos about it on social media. However, an Israeli security source declared, "We will not allow activists to break the naval blockade of the Gaza Strip." Shayetet 13 commandos of the IDF and the Navy are preparing for boarding. Back to the United Nations General Assembly, Iran's president made an incredible statement during his remarks saying, "We did not strive and we will not strive to develop nuclear weapons." He also accused Israel of attacking in the midst of negotiations, which he insists were being carried out in good faith. However, his phony outrage is unlikely to do his country much good, as we are days away from the date for the renewal of the so-called snapback sanctions on Iran by several different countries. And amidst an intensive effort to prevent escalation, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency was interviewed by El Arabiya this week and explained his position on this matter, and at the same time, the head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, Muhammad Isalami, said in a separate media interview, despite international pressures and Israel's threats of further attacks, the facilities that were struck will be restored. Now, speaking of restored facilities, satellite documentation reveals that Iran has begun restoring the missile production sites that were struck during the 12-day war, but it lacks critical equipment to produce solid fuel. The production facilities at Porkhin and Sharaud are being worked on, but without this crucial equipment, the entire process is stuck. And finally, TBN Israel director Samuel Smadja will bring us an interview with Ken Isaacs from our studio in Jerusalem to give us a perspective on how to support Israel during this time. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is a special edition of Boots on the Ground, and together with Mati Shoshani, Samuel Smadja, we are reporting to you about what's happening in Israel. Today is day 720 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to call on you to help Israel. How, you ask? So Israel is fighting an onslaught of lies that are being spread by a bunch of extremist movements. Every day, engineered lies are being published to generate hatred against the people of Israel. So we are here to bring the truth. Stand with Israel and fight on the information front. That's why we need you to share, to leave a comment, to hit the like button. The most important thing is to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, let's get into the news, and we'll start with what is happening on the ground in the fighting against the terrorist organization Hamas in Gaza. The IDF has completed the encirclement of Gaza City, and on Tuesday, the 3 IDF divisions deployed inside the city completed the seizure of the dominated areas, including the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood, the coastline, Sabra, and Tel El Hawa. And meanwhile, a military source says that Hamas is currently in a kind of confusion, as it does not know from where the IDF is attacking it. It is not aware of the scope of the forces that the IDF is employed against them. For now, the scope of engagement is limited, and Hamas is not seeking to clash with the IDF except in a few incidents, one of which was yesterday, in which Major Shachar Natanel Buzaglo, a company commander in the 77th Armored Battalion, fell in battle. As a reminder, towards the eve of Rosh Hashanah and the Tishrei holidays, the Jewish holidays, the IDF spokesperson announced that in accordance with the multi-fronts situational assessment, it was decided to reinforce and raise the readiness of dozens of companies in the training of fighters from across the IDF for defense and offensive missions in the various sectors during these holidays, Tishrei Jewish high holidays. They added that the IDF reinforced the combat sectors with forces in the air, at sea, and on land, and all across all areas throughout these countries. The IDF assesses that Hamas commanders inside the city are in distress and under pressure. We have many testimonies about acts of violence by Hamas operatives towards the residents of the Gaza Strip in order to keep them as human shields, preparing for the IDF maneuver. We saw over the weekend that Hamas attacked a United Nations convoy, which indicates their distress. We know other things regarding the situation that Hamas is inside Gaza City, and this is according to a military source. And meanwhile, the IDF's 36th Division is now Israel's center of gravity in the campaign. The military plan is to bring the division's firepower into the city, while the 162nd and 98th divisions, which are already operating in the urban area, have created a cordon and isolation of Hamas forces, allowing focused and thorough action inside the city against the organization. The IDF's plan is based on employing massive fire through movement inside the city and its clearing above ground and also below it of terrorism. Assuming the IDF meets 60 to 80% of the objectives that it has set for itself, this could lead to a situation in which Hamas will be left without an organized fighting military framework aside from a few forces in the central camps. And amidst all of this kinetic activity, the IDF spokesperson published footage on Wednesday of Hamas operatives carrying out heavy fire from within the Shifa hospital in Gaza City earlier this week. Along with the footage, the IDF issued a statement that this use of a civilian structure, and especially an active hospital, constitute further proof of the cynical and constant model operandi of this terrorist organization, the way that they operate, Hamas, which turns civilians' infrastructure into managed terror headquarters. Meanwhile, in Gaza City, reports since Wednesday morning spoke of intense airstrikes, and in parallel, there are also reports of a belt of fire in the Shati camp in western Gaza. At the same time, the IDF spokesperson confirmed that the Air Force eliminated Iyad Abu Yusuf, the deputy commander of Hamas's naval police, in a precise strike in the central camps. The strike was carried out under the intelligence direction from the Navy and the Intelligence Directorate. The IDF said that Yusuf took part in the Hamas massacre of October 7, 2023, and during the fighting in the Gaza Strip, he planned ambushes against IDF forces and worked to secure the organization's assets. The statement added that since the start of Operation Gideon's Chariots B, the Navy has been working to thwart infrastructures and key personnel in the naval police, in close cooperation with the maneuvering forces and in real-time operational closure of circles in cooperation with the ground forces and the Air Force. The Navy's Flotilla, 916 fighters, constitute an important operational component in the ground maneuver inside Gaza. The forces assist with fire from the sea and with rapid circle closures from the sea, from the land, and from the air. And here at TBN Israel, we will keep reporting on all of these developments moving forward. And as always, we invite you to be part of the team and help us spread the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and above all, give a click to that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, before we move to the international declarations at the United Nations regarding the future of the war in Israel and the United States standing alongside this country, I want to bring you a quick report about a UAV launched at Israel by the Houthis in Yemen on Wednesday evening, which managed to avoid the air defenses and hit a shopping center in Israel's southern city of Eilat. This is a Red Sea resort city. This came less than a week after another Houthi-launched drone hit a hotel in Eilat. That drone did not cause any casualties, but this latest one on Wednesday evening left 21 people wounded. 2 of them were taken to a hospital in Eilat before being evacuated by helicopters to Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, where they were listed in serious condition. The IDF is investigating the failure of the Iron Dome system to intercept the UAV, despite 2 interceptors being fired at it. Its low altitude made it more difficult for the fighter jets to intercept it, as the usual procedures call for. And lately, the Houthis have started using new tactics, sending drones towards Eilat at low altitude and slow speeds, making them difficult to detect and also to intercept using the defensive systems that are usually used to intercept UAVs. And last week, as mentioned, a UAV launched from Yemen exploded at the entrance to the Jacob Hotel in Eilat. A fire broke out in the courtyard, but there were no casualties in this incident. And a week earlier, a Houthi UAV hit a passenger hall at the Ramon airport near Eilat, and damage was caused to the site. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development regarding these Houthi drone attacks. So keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, do not forget to click that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, I want to talk to you for just a moment about the unique opportunity being offered by one of our partners. Imagine holding in your hands the very soil from the Temple Mount, the place where Solomon built the first temple and where Jesus walked, taught, and fulfilled prophecy. In 1999, something extraordinary happened. Tons of soil were removed from the Temple Mount as part of a project that should never have happened because it damaged the ability of the archaeological teams to do their work properly in this site. This moment in history will never be repeated, but inside that soil are traces of the first and second temples, artifacts of biblical times, and the very ground where God's presence once dwelt. Now, for the first time ever, you can own a small piece of this history. Each bottle of soil is carefully screened and certified by the Temple Mount Shifting Project, the only authorized team entrusted with this sacred material. This isn't just Jerusalem soil. It's the real earth from the holiest site in biblical history, and it can create a tangible connection between Scripture and your daily walk with God. This is your chance to touch the ground where Jesus actually walked and to help preserve biblical history for generations to come. So don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Just visit www.templesoil.com/TBN and secure yours today. Again, that's templesoil.com/TBN and secure yours today. Now back to the news, because this week the United Nations General Assembly meeting was held in New York, and Israel was mentioned in every single speech by the heads of states. Several speeches by the heads of the states from Western countries included declarations that those countries were recognizing a Palestinian state, while United States President Donald Trump delivered a forceful speech against the move. French President Emmanuel Macron announced official recognition of a Palestinian state, noting that the step was intended to revive diplomatic efforts and does not ignore Hamas's attacks. The United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia also announced recognition, while Italy clarified that it would do so only on condition that all the hostages are released and Hamas is not part of a future government. Other major countries, including Germany, Japan, and Denmark, said that they will not recognize a Palestinian state at this point. However, a significant bloc of leaders chose to focus on the war in Gaza and the hostages. The United Nations Secretary General called for a permanent ceasefire and the immediate release of all the hostages, but in contrast, the Emir of Qatar accused Israel of deliberately torpedoing the negotiations, and President Erdogan of Turkey spoke of genocide in Gaza. In a speech that lasted almost an hour, President Trump leveled sharp criticism at the countries who are announcing the recognition of a Palestinian state, arguing that it is a reward for Hamas that does not take into account the fate of the hostages. He also spoke out against international institutions and liberal immigration policies, as well as against European countries that did not take a tough line towards Russia. In addition, President Trump met with representatives from Muslim countries to discuss the future of the Gaza Strip, to examine options for governments that would not include Hamas. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst will share his thoughts on what was said at the UN General Assembly and what might happen next. So Mati, what happened there?
Thank you, Yael. Yes, this has been a dramatic week in the UN General Assembly, with a wave of recognition of a quote-unquote Palestinian state by leaders from multiple countries. But the highlight of everything that's been happening is a speech made by President Trump and the upcoming expected speech of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on that same stage in the UN General Assembly. Let's break down everything that's been happening, because these are dramatic, important, and even historic moments that are taking place in front of our eyes. So over the past days, multiple national leaders have taken the stage at the UN General Assembly, and many of them have one trend, one thought in their minds, and it relates to Israel and the Palestinian state, and specifically a desire to recognize a Palestinian state. This has been recognized by multiple European governments and countries, but then countered strongly, dramatically, and substantially by US President Donald Trump. And all of this is shadowed by the fact that just tomorrow, we're expecting to see a substantial, a dramatic speech given by Prime Minister Netanyahu on exactly that topic. So a lot of moving pieces are taking place, a lot is happening in the background, and behind the negotiations, behind the speeches being made in the UN General Assembly, there's also the ongoing negotiation with the Qataris, with Arab countries, taking place in the Middle East, led by US Emissary Steve Witkoff. So there's a lot happening, a lot taking place as we record this segment. So let's talk about who's been recognizing a Palestinian state. One, I want to say that the French were the first to make an announcement, and they say the following. They say they recognize a Palestinian state, but without ignoring the facts of October 7th. On top of them, the UK, Canada, Australia have also announced that they will be recognizing a state. The Italian government had said that they would recognize only if all hostages are released and Hamas excluded from any future Palestinian government, which is a very substantial difference. But before we continue, I want to frame this conversation. Many people might not know that countless countries have already recognized a Palestinian state. Most of the Muslim countries, many other countries around the world have already previously recognized a Palestinian state. The big difference here, or there are two big differences here actually, is one is this is happening after October 7th, 2023, where it has become abundantly clear, without any shadow of doubt, that anyone who recognizes a Palestinian state, while Hamas still controls the Gaza Strip, is giving a gift to Hamas Gaza. The second thing happening here is that countries that in the past were much more diplomatic, much more cautious, the UK, the French, with everything that has to do with the recognition, they're now making a bold statement. And that is different. That isn't some other country. That isn't even Russia or China who would do this from political reasons. These are major European countries, and the significance of it cannot be underestimated. This is very dramatic, very different than what we've seen so far. One of the dramatic highlights of this week in the UN General Assembly is US President Donald Trump taking the stage, and he makes some very bold, some very supportive, some very strong statements. He says this, and I want to get these quotes right. He says that recognizing a Palestinian state right now is a prize for Hamas for the events of October 7th. That's a direct quote. And on the topic of Hamas and Gaza, he says that everyone must unite under one message: release every last hostage now. We want all of them now, not 2 and then 4. And he addresses, of course, the fact that this has happened many times in the past in sort of a staggered manner. On the ending of the war, President Trump says, we need to stop the war in Gaza immediately. And of course, he doesn't spare criticism of the UN, which is something he does repeatedly, and I'd say in a very, very valid manner. He says, so much wasted potential. Those are his words as he addresses the UN General Assembly. So again, very strong, very, very condemning words from President Trump towards the UN, towards other countries who are recognizing a Palestinian state. And this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. President Trump has carried the same line of thought and speech on this topic time and time again. I mentioned previously that the U.S. administration is not only working through the UN, President Trump is also strongly working directly with Arab leaders throughout the Middle East. In fact, several conversations took place that included the Saudis, the Qataris, the UAE, Egypt, and even Turkey, and other countries that joined in or chimed in at other parts of this meeting. This took place outside of the General Assembly, but again, it's the U.S. government working with different Arab countries. And what they're doing there, what they're promoting there, is a deeper conversation with the Arab countries about what the Middle East will look like in the day after and what their place will be compared to Israel and as it relates to the United States and the Iranians and, of course, the Palestinian issue, which has dominated the conversation so far. One of the big statements that President Trump makes is the following. He says to these Arab leaders that there will be no one-sided annexation of Judea and Samaria. He also says that there will be a long-term ceasefire agreement, that all Israeli hostages will be released from Hamas captivity, and that there will be a substantial surge of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. And at the end of the process, this is something very important to note, at the end of the process, there will be very little IDF presence inside the Gaza Strip, but he doesn't fully disclose what the plan for the day after is. I want to put a little pin in a thought that's being discussed behind the scenes. There's been an ongoing conversation of something called the 21-point plan presented by the U.S. government for a solution that relates to the Palestinians and the conflict that's taking place in this region. And it's been teased several times by the U.S. administration, but hasn't been fully presented yet. And I expect it will happen together or right after the Netanyahu address of the UN General Assembly, which is expected on Friday. The reason I say this is because the U.S. administration has teased ideas similar to what's talked about with the Arab leaders as a bigger solution, a broader, more comprehensive solution to what's taking place here. And this would be their plan to really end things. This isn't something new. Many administrations have done this before. They've come with their big speech, their big plan of how to resolve issues in the Middle East. And it seems like the Trump administration have done their homework here and are about to present exactly that. Something worth noting is that although many countries are siding with the Palestinian state in the UN General Assembly, there are many others that are not. And not only that, important to note is the fact that many of the Arab countries are actually supportive of what the US administration is trying to do in the Middle East. And let me read you some quotes. President Sisi of Egypt says the following things about the Trump proposal. He says it's a basis for future peace. That's a direct quote. The King of Jordan also seems supportive of the plan, although he is very hesitant in his wording. But the big piece on the table really is the Qataris and then the Saudis. Let me remind you what's been happening with the Qataris. The Qataris were struck by Israel just a short time ago, about a week and a half ago, as I stand here. They were struck by Israel in Doha, Qatar, but it wasn't a strike against Qatar proper. It was a strike against Hamas leadership within Qatar, within their capital, actually. They were sponsoring Hamas terrorism. And the U.S., specifically through emissary Witkoff, has been working to bring back the Qataris as the mediators between Israel, Hamas, and the U.S. And they've done so quite successfully, I should say, and they've been able to pull them in to the point that the Qataris are now talking about returning to their previous role as the mediators in this ongoing negotiation. Let's dive into some of the things that have been said on the UN General Assembly stage. And we'll start with the Secretary General Guterres, who said the following things. He says, we need an immediate ceasefire. He also said that nothing justifies Hamas's horrific attacks and hostage taking. Interesting words from the General Secretary of the UN. He also says that nothing justifies collective punishment and systematic destruction in Gaza, which is, of course, criticism against the government and the policy of the State of Israel. And he calls for an immediate implementation of all ICJ orders and a halt of settler violence, which is, of course, his wording, and annexation threats in the West Bank. This is, by the way, something President Trump addressed quite clearly in his communication, both off the UN General Assembly stage and to Arab leaders in other conversations that took place. But behind the scenes, really the big move here is the European leaders, their move, their thrust, their push for a Palestinian state, which is by all measures and means bizarre and unreasonable completely. But still, this is what is taking place. So let's talk about French President Macron, who recognized, of course, the Palestinian state. He says that their aim is to revive diplomacy. He says that this does not ignore the Hamas attacks of October 7th. At the same time, we have the government of the UK in London, the Canadian government, several others that all move for recognitions, but the details are still not fully formalized on this topic. And important to note is that the Italian government, based in Rome, says clearly, look, we have a conditional path here. We want to recognize these people, but first and foremost, all hostages need to be freed, and Hamas cannot carry a leadership role in the Gaza Strip in the day after. And I want to make a note here, this is really important, is that the Israeli Foreign Ministry has been working very hard to get exactly that message across. The message of the Italian government that whatever your opinion is and whatever you're wanting to do, make sure that the hostages are number one in your priority list. And it seems it's been at least partially successful. Moving on, Prime Minister Netanyahu is scheduled to speak to the UN General Assembly just tomorrow. And we're expecting him to make some very bold, some very strong statements on what's happening in the Gaza Strip, on the efforts to release the hostages, on the Doha incident, and of course on Israel's policy on Iran. And then after the weekend, Netanyahu is planned to meet with President Trump in the White House to align Israel and the US on everything that's happening. And there's a lot. On the hostage deal, on the end game for the Gaza Strip, on efforts to halt the Iranian nuclear program, on the efforts to rebuild Lebanon, and of course on the regional normalization talks that are taking place in this part of the world. There's a lot on the table and a lot of moving pieces. I can't think of a week where we've seen so much happening so fast with such rapid succession as we're seeing today. So where are we going from here? We've talked about an ongoing wave of recognition of a Palestinian state that's done while Hamas is the leading government in Gaza, and while the Palestinian Authority promotes terrorism, steals much of its money, and doesn't seem to have a strong enough grasp over its people, the land, or the economics of it to actually be a viable leadership plan for the Palestinian Authority moving forward. So where are we going with this wave of recognition and the very dramatic pressure against it by the US government? I think there are two main tracks that are going to take place here. I'll start with the negative and I'll end with what I believe is the more plausible, positive end game here. So the negative is that future countries and more countries recognize a Palestinian state. They do it unilaterally. They ignore Israel in that process, and that applies more and more pressure on the state of Israel, more and more pressure on the US to reach some kind of regional agreement. That also makes it very hard to negotiate quickly and effectively with Hamas Gaza, which is a huge concern both for me and I believe for other people in the state of Israel. Here's what I think is more plausible. Here's what I think is more realistic. I believe both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in the next couple of days are going to present a clear and comprehensive plan for reshaping the Middle East. It's going to include the end of the conflict in Gaza, the humanitarian efforts to rebuild the Gaza Strip, an address and a direct speech to the Iranian government and to the Palestinian people. I have no doubt that this is going to be on the table and at least addressed publicly. Then, slightly less likely, is the fact that the US might be able to actually present a full, comprehensive, what they're calling the 21-point or whatever number of point plan to the world. And that plan will be sort of the rehabilitation of Israeli-Palestinian relations, but also rebuilding Iran, and also bringing stability, trade, commerce, and peace to this war-torn region. And I think that's where we're likely to go. We're likely to see some very strong and historic statements by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then later on, early next week, a very bold plan presented by the US government together with the Israeli government. I think that's a likely place to go. Now, in summary, I don't want you to walk away from this thinking that what we're experiencing right now in the UN General Assembly isn't dramatic and isn't negative for the state of Israel. It is hugely negative for the state of Israel. It is a prize to Hamas terrorists for what they did on October 7th. It is a punishment to the Palestinian people, but also to the Israeli people. And more than anything, it shows blindness and lack of moral clarity on behalf of the governments that choose to unilaterally recognize the Palestinian state instead of trying to work with the Israeli government and the Palestinians together to bring a change. Now, the right thing to do is end the war in the Gaza Strip. The right thing to do is have an agreement in this region, but you don't do that by just recognizing the Palestinian state. These things take time, they take process, they take thought, and we're seeing that coming mostly from the US government and the Israeli government, and I expect the next days are going to be very dramatic days, both with the statements made by Prime Minister Netanyahu and, of course, also by President Trump. Now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you very much, Mati. Indeed, in the coming days, we will understand better what's happening. And just a reminder that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is flying to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly on Friday. He will also attend several other diplomatic functions before meeting with US President Donald Trump at the White House on Monday. This will be the fourth meeting between Netanyahu and Trump since the president's return to the White House in January, and perhaps the most important one. The American president wants the war to be over soon as possible, but from his UN General Assembly speech, it appears that President Trump insists on a comprehensive deal for the release of all the hostages, and he reiterated his opposition to a gradual release of hostages. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development, so stay tuned to our channel because we will bring you breaking live reports on every development on this subject. Israel is fighting on many fronts and winning. But on one front we are losing, and that's the public diplomacy front and the truth. So help us spread what's happening here, the truth. Share, leave a comment, and hit the like button to help us reach more people. And the best thing that you can do for YouTube's algorithm is to hit that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to what's happening on the ground every single day. And now we are switching our focus to Iran, where the Ayatollah regime is furious at having lost the 12-day war in June and is signaling that it wants a rematch. Despite ongoing economic problems and environmental issues, the threat of renewed sanctions, and many other problems, satellite images published on Wednesday by the AP news agency show that Iran has begun to restore the missile production facilities at Parchin and Sharaud, which were struck by Israel in the 12-day war this past June. Now, according to the images, activity at the Parchin and the Sharaud sites included refurbishing structures dedicated to mixing fuel components, but so-called planetary mixers and machines with blades rotating around a central axis have not yet been reinstalled. So according to various reports, China is able to sell Iran this equipment, but there are reasons that it might not. We'll keep an eye open about all of these developments and let you know. In the meantime, it's important to note that Iran was estimated to be capable of producing over 200 solid fuel missiles per month, even before the war with Israel. Sam Liar, a researcher at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, told AP that if Iran can reacquire the equipment like planetary mixers, the necessary infrastructure is already there, and it will be able to restart the production. That, of course, assumes that Israel will not make any more attempts to disable these plans. And once again, we'll keep an eye on this issue and let you know if there's any news to report about it. And elsewhere, against the backdrop of the growing threat to impose sanctions on Iran and activate the snapback mechanism in response to violations of nuclear limits and Iran's attempts to prevent the move, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Rafael Grossi, spoke with the El Arabiya news portal this week. Grossi claimed that raising Iran's uranium enrichment to 90% is a matter of weeks, not months or years. As is knows, these are critical days in this issue after the European powers set a deadline to reinstate sanctions by September 27, which is this coming Saturday, if no understandings with Iran are reached. Grossi went on to say that Iran still has the capability to advance its nuclear program. The the agency has renewed inspections of Iran's facilities, but we have not received access approval to 60% enriched uranium stockpile. Iran is aggressively guarding its 60% enriched uranium stockpile because it believes it remains vulnerable for future attacks. As recalled, over the weekend, Iran decided to stop cooperating with the International Atomic Energy Agency after the United Nations Security Council conveyed the discussion and issued a draft resolution regarding the reinstatement of sanctions. In a recorded statement, Khamenei declared that Iran will not succumb to Western pressure to forego uranium enrichment. He added, "The American side says, you must not enrich at all. We have not and we will not succumb to pressure on the issue of uranium enrichment and on any other issue as well." But then, on Wednesday, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian spoke at the United Nations General Assembly podium and declared that Iran has never sought and will never seek to develop a nuclear weapon. The president of Iran also referred to the Israeli attack on his country last June and said, "My country was subjected to an aerial attack by the Zionist entity and the American regime against the infrastructure and homes of the Iranian people while we were in the midst of negotiations, as well as an attack on the scientists, the children, the leaders. All of this is a blatant violation of international principles." This is according to Iran here. There is so much to say about this speech by the Iranian president, but maybe I don't even need to say it. His hypocrisy kind of speaks for itself. Lies and hypocrisy are everywhere in this season. We are passing through a very, very important time in this region and in the world. And that is why here at TBN Israel, we are sharing the truth every day, boots on the ground style. So if you want to support us, make sure to hit the like, leave a comment, and subscribe to TBN Israel YouTube channel. Now, we've come to the part of the report where I have to tell you that in Israel, we are preparing for the arrival next week of dozens of vessels to the Gaza Strip as part of the Shamud Flotilla. In the Israeli Kan News broadcast on Wednesday, it was reported that security officials in Israel say that one of the activists in the flotilla is Saif Abu Kishak, a Spanish citizen directly linked to Hamas, a terrorist organization, and that the goal of the flotilla is a provocation. A security source clarified to Kan News, "We will not allow activists to break the naval blockade of the Gaza Strip. Shayetet 13 commandos of the IDF and the Navy is preparing to take control of the vessels if they approach the Gaza Strip area." The Foreign Ministry added that if flotilla participants intend to transfer aid to Gaza, they can and should do it via the Ashkelon port in Israel. This week, flotilla activists claimed that unidentified aircrafts dropped stun grenades on them from the air in the middle of the sea in order to frighten them, and later took over the communication network and played songs by the Swedish band ABBA. Israeli officials refused to comment on these reports. The Shamud Flotilla set out earlier this week from Barcelona, carrying dozens of pro-Palestinian activists, including Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, with the aim of breaking the naval blockade on the Gaza Strip. The vessels are currently in the area of the Greek island of Crete. The previous two flotillas, Madeline and Khandala, ended with Shayetet 13 Israeli commandos taking control of the ships. And now, let's go to TBN Israel director Samuel Smadja from our studio in Jerusalem for an in-depth interview with Ken Isaacs about how you can support Israel during this time.
Thank you, Yair, and shalom from Jerusalem. I'm here with Mr. Ken Isaacs. Ken is a friend, but he's also the vice president of Samaritans First and the author of the book Running to the Fire, Helping in Jesus' Name. Ken, shalom.
Thank you, Samuel. It's good to be with you today.
Great being with you. You know, the name of your book is the opposite of what people usually do. And I saw it on the 7th of October. Most of the foreigners, most of the tourists just left. And 3 days later, there was a team on your behalf here in Jerusalem. You came a few days after. Wherever there's fire in the world, you definitely are running into the fire.
Yeah. So running into the fire is a figure of speech, right? But we do run into the disasters of the world, the fires of the world, into the ditches of the world. And we do that and help people in Jesus' name. It's a simple philosophy, and that's who we are as an organization. And I've had the great blessing to spend 37 years of my life doing this. And so it was time to write a book about it and tell people what God has done.
What triggered you to write the book?
Well, I wanted the book to be an inspiration to young people. And I felt like sharing some of the stories where God has led us and God has protected us, that the Lord might use that to inspire other people.
In your book, you're writing about dangerous situation that you were involved in.
Right.
What's the story that impacted your life more than anything else?
That's a hard question to answer because a lot of the things where I've ran to the fire in countries where I've worked in, you see human suffering on a scale that no one was intended to see, whether it was the genocide in Rwanda or the war in Sudan or in Darfur or what's going on in Congo, what has happened here, what's going on in Israel. They all have impacted me in unique ways. I would say that the genocide in Rwanda was certainly a turning point in my life. 9/11 was a turning point. Going back to Afghanistan was a turning point. There's a journey along the way where God has used these different occasions in my life.
In a way, you saw more evil in men than the average person around the world.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate about that?
I think the average person wants to believe that people are basically good. That's not my worldview as a Christian. My worldview is that we are fallen creatures and that there's not goodness or some light in our life. We're dark. And what I can personally witness to is there is no bottom to how brutal mankind can be to other human beings. There is no bottom. And, we saw that here October the 7th, 2023.
But you also talk about faith and about a peace that God gave you. Can you elaborate about that?
When I was a young man, married, 2 children, I worked in a family business drilling water wells. And I went for 1 month as a volunteer on a mission trip to Africa. And when I came back, I had this feeling in my heart that God was calling me to the world. I prayed about it for 2 years, and eventually God answered my prayer in ways that I could never have imagined. I just wanted to share that story because I think it is so important for people to practically put their trust in God, particularly if they're searching for the Lord's will in their life, if they're wondering what they should do. Trust Him. Trust Him. That is the central theme of that book.
In one sentence, how can you summarize the book?
This is a book about what God has done with an organization that has grown to proclaim the gospel around the world, and it's something God has done. That's how I would summarize it.
2 years ago, you ran into a different fire, a fire in the Middle East, a fire here in Israel, and there's no doubt that Samaritans first, and you being vice president of the organization, have been here again and again and again and again. What's your first reaction?
You have to ask yourself a question: why does so much pain and agony befall on the Jewish people? A good friend that works for you told me last night that the story of the Jewish people is they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. I thought that was humorous, but I think that Israel is full of God's chosen people, and I think that because of that, the road ahead is not going to be smooth. Really, some of the brilliant military and intelligence steps that the Israeli government has taken, the IDF, so on, and there's certainly been victories there, but there's still hostages and remains that need to come back. Hamas is there. Hamas is evil and darkness, and now you've got 2.2 million Gazans that need the basic things in life, and it's just tough. And Israel is taking all of that on. They need help. They need prayer, and I think they need support.
Ken, when we see the media coming from around the world, Israel is being blamed that Israel prevent people to help the Palestinians that are living in Gaza. You've been in Gaza several times. What's your impression?
There are pockets of famine in Gaza, but there is not starvation. There are accusations made coming out of the media and coming out of other countries that are uninformed and actually a distortion of reality. I don't understand what motivates people to do that. But I'll tell you what I am focused on. You know, we came here and we helped the Israeli people, and we're still helping the Israeli people. And I will fight for that same right to let me go help the people in Gaza is too, and that's what we're working on right now. I want to see peace come to the land, and Hamas is going to have to be resolved.
So you see Hamas as an obstacle for humanitarian help?
Oh, there's no question. They're controlling the food. They're controlling the markets. It's not just that they're taking truckloads of food, but they're able to control the markets, the market prices. And I've talked to enough Palestinian people, they're scared to death of Hamas.
Can you give us an overview of what's going on, not just with Samaritans first, but from what you saw and what you heard, because you're very familiar on the situation. What's going on now when you talk about humanitarian help in Gaza?
The access is limited. It's an active war zone. There is tension between the UN and this new thing that has been formed called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And I believe that the UN sees a threat really to their existence of the humanitarian industrial complex. If there's a new entity, if there's a new way to help the needs of the people, the UN sees all this going to waste. This isn't going to win me any brownie points here, saying these things. But I have been in meetings and I've seen, like I said, distortion of facts. And it's not right. Israel does not have a policy to shoot Palestinians. Israel does not have a policy, nor are they enacting means to starve people. But then I saw an instance also where recently the UN had 948 trucks of supplies that they had taken in that were sitting on the ground inside of Gaza. And it had been there for a long time. When we called their hand on it and when the video footage came up on it, 48 hours later, they started moving that food like left and right. The UN had military guards in Somalia. They had them in Rwanda. They had them in Bosnia. They had them in Croatia. They had them in Afghanistan. They had them in Iraq. They got them in Congo. They have them. Oh, and in fact, a month ago, they signed another contract with a private military contractor in Somalia to help them deliver their food secure. So why is it that they don't want GHF involved, and why is it that they don't want the IDF involved to help with secure passages? You know, they have their own reasoning for that. I don't agree with it, but here's what I do agree with. You have to have humanitarian access, and that means that you have to work with the armed combatants. You can't ignore one side. And Israel controls Gaza. Anybody that's going to do humanitarian work inside of Gaza is going to have a relationship with Israel. And I have found that the IDF and that the Israeli government, COGAT, are very cooperative. They're looking for ways to move things forward. And we are doing all that we can in cooperation with them because we want access to the Palestinian people in Gaza so that we can help them in Jesus' name. That's who we are and that's what we do.
What's your next step here of Samaritans First? In Gaza, around the country?
The situation is at hand with GHF and the secure sites, the logistics and the security apparatus they're setting up, that we can reach more people. I think that people in Gaza, the Palestinians, they need a place where they can come to without the threat of their lives or injury from Hamas. And
wait, you're saying something. According to what you say, Hamas is threatening people who are coming to get help?
Yes. Yeah, they've told me that. I mean, I've been in the distribution sites, and they've come up, the ones that speak English, and say Hamas is threatening to kill us. It's dangerous for us to come here. But yet they come. Why do they come? If they were worried about the IDF or GHF, they wouldn't come. But they come because they're desperate for food.
Definitely.
But they also come because they feel safe there. They're worried about going back. That's where they're worried about. And so what we are, as Samaritans Purse, are doing, we have set up first aid stations at the distribution sites. We're also setting up distributions separately for women with supplemental food. And now we're seeing like 4,000 women a day come in. We're able to supply things with them, and we want to build on that and do more. It's a war. It's sad, Samuel, but people die in war, and people that weren't the target die in war. But frankly, if Hamas had not have built their tunnels under the houses and the schools and the mosque, and if they hadn't put weapons under there, you wouldn't be looking at what you're looking at now. And this war has been designed by the creators of the war to maximize death among the Palestinian people.
We're sitting here with Ken Isaacs, and he's giving us facts that not that he heard about it, not that he gathered from a book or from the media. He brings us first-hand information. You have volunteers from around the world that are coming to volunteer. What do you tell them? I mean, they're coming into a war zone.
They're not just guys that walk in off the street. They're carefully selected, and then we bring them out knowing that they represent us. And then we try to do everything that we can to support them and to guide them. And we call them DART, Disaster Assistance Response Team. And we have about 2,700 people on that list. We believe that the quality of our work is the platform of our witness. If we're going to give people medical attention, if we're going to give them clean water, we want it to be the best.
Are you looking for more volunteers?
We're always looking for more DART team members.
Guys, if you're watching us and you want to do something challenging, something with a huge meaning, something really to help somebody in need, contact Samaritans Purse.
You can contact Samaritans Purse at SamaritansPurse.org. One word, no apostrophe, SamaritansPurse.org.
And you can tell them that Ken Isaacs invited you.
Yes.
Ken, we know that there is wars around the world. We know there's disaster around the world. Israel is always taking almost 90% of all the media. And nobody talks about suffering around the world as we talk right now.
Well, I mean, you look at Sudan right now, there's 12 million people displaced, 150,000 dead, and it's well documented. Nobody's talking about it.
Why?
I have to think that Israel has a special place from the dawn of creation in the biblical worldview until Jesus comes again. There's something supernatural about it.
When you look forward, what's your hope for Israel and this region?
You know, from a biblical worldview, it's ultimately going to be the return of Christ, but we don't know when that is. I don't know if that'll be 5 days or 500 years or 5,000 years. I don't know what that'll be. But in my heart, I would like to see peace. I would like to see people get along. Why do people need to fight and kill each other? Why is there hatred? Why is there brutality? Why is there darkness?
It's demonic.
It's demonic. It is demonic. And anybody that doesn't understand that there are powers of darkness in the world, they need to read the Bible.
Ken, for closing, do you have any message and a thought that you want to express from the studio of TBN here to the rest of the world?
I would say that no matter where you live, if you live in Jerusalem or if you live in New York, the fire may be on the other side of the world, but it also could be on the other side of the room. It could be on the other side of the street. Go there and help people in Jesus' name. Show love, show compassion, show service. God will reward you, and you can trust Him in all things. This is the message. So for the young generation, please, don't live a life where you're bound in by your own desires in your heart, but live a life where you're living outside to help the world and others, and do it in the name of Christ, and He will bless that.
Ken Isaacs, running to the fire, helping in Jesus' name. Thank you, my dear brother.
Well, thank you, but I want to do something before we
Yes.
quit. I want to send that book to Matt Crouch, and I want to sign it.
Oh,
And you're going to get it delivered. Can you do that?
yes, I definitely can.
TBN has been a great friend to Samaritan's Purse over the years, and we love them, and we appreciate the ministry so much. And now I'm going to do a Donald Trump.
Thank you.
Please deliver that to them. And Samuel, thank you for having me on today. I'm honored.
Thank you, Ken Isaacs, and thank you guys for joining us. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, for this region, for the Jews and the Arabs. And back to you, Yair.
So please, continue to spread the truth and pray about what's happening in Israel. This is a spiritual war, and the best thing that we can do is unite in prayer for all of the people that are affected by these terrorist organizations. Keep praying for them to have the peace of God in their heart. Pray for the IDF soldiers that are preparing and fighting in the Gaza Strip as we speak. Pray for those that are fighting in Syria, those that are fighting in Lebanon, those that are defending us from aerial attacks from the Houthis in Yemen. These people that claim that Israel wants this war are so mistaken, because all we want is to live here in peace. We are attacked from 7 different fronts. We need to defend ourselves. What do you think will happen if we just put down our arms? We will not be here anymore. So please continue to spread the truth. And above all, remember to pray. This is a spiritual war. If Israel did not matter to God, it wouldn't be attacked by 7 different nations around the world, because the enemy cannot stand that we are here, living proof that God is faithful and that his prophecies thousands of years ago are coming to fruition with the fact that Israel and the Jewish people are alive in this land. It's amazing. It's an amazing encouragement. We see God's miracles every day here. But we need to unite in prayer. Let's pray for the IDF soldiers that are defending us on multiple fronts. Let's pray for all the innocent lives that are affected by this conflict, for the people of Israel, for the people of the Gaza Strip, for the people of Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran. Let's pray for the people of Iran. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.